You're watching Creepcrafts. This is Something Creepy podcast, where we cover all kinds of creepy stories, ghost encounters, strange sightings, urban legends, and stories people still don't have answers for. In today's video, the stories comes out of Appalachia, where most strange things don't come with explanations and usually don't end cleanly either. If you enjoy the stories, like the video and comment where you're watching from.
In the early 20th century, a young man from a small village in Eastern Europe was sent into military service, as was expected of most men his age. He had only been gone a few years when word came back that he had died while stationed elsewhere. His body was returned to the village, and the burial was carried out according to local customs. The funeral was attended, the grave was filled, and people assumed that was the end of it. The next morning, the caretaker of the cemetery found the grave disturbed. The earth had been moved, and the coffin was no longer underground. It was sitting beside the grave, lid closed, as if it had never been buried at all. There were no signs of digging tools or footprints. The caretaker reported it to the priest, and together they assumed it was a cruel prank or vandalism. The coffin was placed back in the grave and covered again. The same thing happened the following morning. After the third time, the caretaker decided to stop reburying the body. He moved the coffin into a small storage shed near the cemetery where he kept his equipment. He reasoned that if someone was doing this, they would stop once the body was no longer in the ground. Over time, people stopped talking about it. The village had other concerns, and eventually the strange incident became something people mentioned only in passing. The caretaker kept chickens. One hen in particular developed a habit of wandering into the shed. Almost every day she would climb onto the coffin and lay an egg near the lower end of it. The caretaker noticed this and found it odd, but he didn't interfere. On the few occasions when he tried to collect the eggs, he became uncomfortable and stopped, later saying that something about the situation felt wrong. He didn't tell anyone exactly why. Years passed. The young man who had died had once been involved with a girl from the village. They had been serious, and everyone knew it. After his death, she mourned for a long time, but eventually her family encouraged her to move on. She agreed to marry someone else. Weddings were community events, and nearly everyone in the village attended. There was food, music, and drinking, as was typical. As the celebration went on, some of the guests began talking about the old story of the soldier in the shed. Someone suggested that the eggs laid there were still untouched. A few men, already drunk, treated it as a joke. One of them volunteered to go get the eggs and bring them back. It was treated like a dare. He left and returned later with the eggs. He did not come back alone. When people noticed the figure standing outside the house, the mood changed. The body was upright, stiff, leaning against the wall near the door. It was clearly the same man who had been buried years earlier. There was no sign of decay beyond what would be expected. His eyes were closed. One arm was slightly extended, as if frozen mid-motion. The man who had brought him there claimed he had only done what he felt compelled to do. He did not seem fully aware of how it had happened. Some people accused him of playing a sick prank. Others said nothing at all. The celebration ended almost immediately. The priest was called over. People stood quietly, unsure of what to do. The body did not move, but it did not fall either. At one point, people noticed that anyone who came close felt an urge to acknowledge it, as if ignoring it would be wrong. Eventually, people lined up and briefly touched the extended hand. Nothing happened. When the bride approached, she hesitated. She appeared visibly shaken. When she touched the hand, it tightened around hers and would not release. She began to cry and eventually admitted that she and the dead man had promised each other they would marry and no one else.
she had broken that promise. After this was acknowledged publicly, the priest performed a short ceremony, treating the promise as fulfilled in some symbolic way. When it was finished, the body released her hand. It collapsed and disappeared. There was no sound or struggle. It was simply no longer there. Later, several people went to the cemetery shed. The coffin was gone. The grave in the cemetery had been restored and showed no signs of disturbance. Grass covered the ground as if it had been settled for years. After that, nothing unusual happened again. People stopped talking about it, except in quiet moments, usually years later, and never for long. No one ever tried to explain it. They just said that some things don't stay buried until whatever holds them here is settled. This happened a long time ago in a small Appalachian community, up in a narrow hollow where the road ended, and most people knew each other by sight, if not by blood. It was the kind of place where families stayed put, land passed down, and the past didn't feel far away. A man named Caleb lived there with his wife. His family had settled the hollow generations earlier, back when the land was cheap and the work was hard. Over time, people came to rely on his family to look after things. Caleb wasn't important in any official way, but when there was trouble, folks went to him. His house sat a little higher than the others, close to the old church and not far from the cemetery. It was understood that if someone came through late, especially in winter, they could knock on his door and be taken in. That had been the custom for as long as anyone could remember. But winters had been quiet for years. No travelers, no strangers, just snow, wind, and the same few lights burning at night. One winter, after a heavy snowfall, there was a knock at the door close to midnight. The snow had been coming down since before dark. The road was already buried, and the hollow was still. Caleb woke up when he heard the knock, sharp and steady. Before he could get up, his wife was already out of bed. She was the kind of person who didn't hesitate. She liked people and rarely felt afraid. Caleb stayed back, pulling on clothes and lighting a lantern. He expected to hear the door open, then footsteps, then the sound of another person inside the house. That didn't happen. A few minutes passed, then more. The house stayed quiet except for the wind. Caleb called out, thinking maybe she'd stepped onto the porch to see who it was. There was no answer. He went downstairs and found the front door standing open. Snow had blown inside and settled on the floorboards. The lamp by the door was still lit. Outside, the snow was smooth, except for a set of footprints leading away from the house. There was only one trail. The prints were small and close together, as if whoever made them hadn't been in a hurry. Caleb stepped outside without thinking and followed them. The door stayed open behind him. The footprints led down the path toward the creek, then along an old trail that hadn't been used much in years. Snow kept falling, but the tracks stayed clear, like they were being preserved instead of covered. He walked for a long time, long enough that the cold started to feel distant, like it belonged to someone else. At some point, he noticed his feet didn't feel right. He stopped and looked down. He was barefoot. He couldn't remember taking off his boots. The footprints continued uphill toward the churchyard. That part of the hollow had always felt different at night. The trees grew closer together there, and sound didn't travel the same way. The cemetery sat just beyond the church, fenced in with old iron rails, most of them bent or rusted. The footprints passed through the open gate. They led straight to one of the oldest graves. It belonged to a man from Caleb's family, someone buried long before Caleb had been born. The grave had a stone enclosure around it, and the door to it stood open. Inside was an old wooden coffin. The coffin was empty. There were scraps of dark cloth inside, dry and brittle, like they had been disturbed after a long time. Nothing else. Caleb didn't stay long. He didn't know what he was looking at or what he was supposed to do. He turned back the way he came, following the same footprints. By the time he reached the house, he was shaking from exhaustion and cold. He went to bed without closing the door properly. When he lay down, he became aware that someone was already there. His wife was beside him, breathing evenly, like she had never left. She didn't wake when he got into bed. In the morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She remembered going to sleep. She didn't remember answering the door. She didn't remember the snow or the footprints or leaving the house at all. Caleb noticed faint marks on her neck. They looked like pressure marks, not scratches. They faded over the next few days. He went back to the cemetery later that morning. The grave enclosure was closed. The ground looked settled. Snow covered everything evenly. There were no footprints. Over the following weeks, Caleb tried to convince himself it had been a dream brought on by exhaustion. But small things didn't line up. The door latch had been unhooked. The lantern by the stairs had burned low. His boots were still by the door, untouched. His wife started having trouble sleeping. She didn't say much about it, but she grew quiet and distant. Sometimes she would wake up confused, like she wasn't sure where she was. She said she dreamed of a man she didn't recognize, someone familiar but not known to her. When Caleb described the ancestor buried in the old grave, she said the man in her dreams matched him closely. The dreams stopped after a while. Life returned to normal as much as it ever did. Winter passed, snow melted. The hollow went back to being quiet. But Caleb changed. He locked the door every night. He no longer encouraged strangers to stay. He avoided the cemetery after dark. He never spoke publicly about what happened, but when people pressed him years later, he said the mountains have a way of holding on to things that aren't finished. People who heard the story later said the strangest part wasn't the empty coffin or the marks on her neck. It was the footprints. One clear trail in fresh snow leading away from the house, and none coming back. I grew up in southern West Virginia, in a part of the mountains where people lived far apart. Minding your own business was considered a skill. The woods started right behind our property and went on for miles. There were old logging roads, strip mine cuts grown over with trees, and hollers that didn't show up on maps anymore. People hunted there, gathered ginseng, and cut firewood. Nobody treated it like wilderness. It was just where you went when you needed something. When I was younger, there were stories about people living deep in the woods. Not ghost stories, just stories about men who stayed away from towns. Older folks called them wild men sometimes, but not in a joking way, more like a description. They weren't supposed to bother anyone if you didn't bother them. That was the general understanding. I didn't think much of it until I was in my early 20s. At the time, I was working odd jobs and helping a neighbor cut timber on his land. He owned a few hundred acres, some of it way back in the hills. We were clearing fallen trees and hauling out usable wood. We parked the truck near an old roadbed and worked our way uphill on foot. It was late fall, after most of the leaves were down. You could see farther through the woods than usual. The first thing I noticed was that some of the trees had markings I didn't recognize, not survey paint or trail blazes. Branches were bent and wedged into other branches at about head height. It didn't look natural, but it also didn't look like anything people normally do. I assumed it was hunters marking something or kids messing around years earlier. As we moved farther in, I noticed the ground looked disturbed in places. Not dug,
just flattened in odd patches, like someone had slept there repeatedly. No trash, no fire ring, no cans or bottles. That was what stood out. Anyone camping leaves something behind. These places didn't. Later that day, I heard movement uphill from where we were working. It wasn't deer. I'd grown up around deer. This was heavier, slower, and it stopped whenever we stopped. I didn't say anything at first. I thought maybe it was another worker or a hunter, but no one else was supposed to be there. When I looked up the slope, I saw a man standing partly behind a tree. He wasn't dressed like a hiker or hunter. His clothes were layered and worn, not torn but old and mismatched. His beard was long and uneven. His hair looked like it had been cut once a long time ago and then left alone. He was watching us without trying to hide completely. I didn't feel scared right away, more unsure than anything. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't moving toward us, just standing there. After a minute, he stepped back and disappeared uphill without making much noise. That bothered me more than if he'd run. People don't usually move that quietly unless they've had practice. We finished the work and left earlier than planned. Neither of us said much about it. Over the next few weeks, other things started happening. Tools left near the truck would be moved overnight, not stolen, just relocated. A chainsaw left by a stump would show up leaned neatly against a tree 50 yards away. Fuel cans would be turned upright if they were left on their side. Nothing aggressive, almost careful. Then livestock started acting strange. A nearby farmer had goats that refused to go into a certain part of their pasture that bordered the woods. They'd bunch up at the fence line and panic if pushed forward. No predators were found, no tracks anyone could identify clearly. The first attack happened in early winter. A man from a nearby hollow went out to check traps he'd set along a creek. He didn't come home that night. When people went looking the next morning, they found him a mile from his trap line, disoriented and injured. He had bruises and scratches, but no knife wounds, no bite marks. His rifle was bent slightly at the barrel, not broken, bent. He said he'd been surprised someone near the creek and been rushed from behind. He remembered being knocked down and hit, then dragged a short distance. He didn't remember being robbed. Nothing was taken. He stopped trapping after that. The second incident was harder to dismiss. Two men were hunting on private land with permission. They were experienced, not careless. One went downhill to track a deer, while the other stayed put. When the first man didn't come back, the second went looking. He found him sitting against a tree, shaken and bleeding from his scalp. He'd been struck from above, a rock most likely. There were more rocks piled there in a way that didn't look natural. The deer was gone. No shots had been fired after the first one. After that, word started spreading quietly. People avoided certain ridges. Kids were told not to wander. Nobody called the police because nobody knew what to say. There was no crime that fit cleanly into a report. I had one more encounter before I decided to stop going into those woods altogether. I went out alone one afternoon to collect some tools we'd left behind near the old roadbed. It was getting darker earlier then, and I didn't want to leave anything overnight. As I was walking back toward the truck, I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I stopped, and they stopped. I started again, and they followed. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't run either. Running felt like a mistake. When I finally looked back, there were two men standing about 30 yards away, both dressed like the first one I'd seen. Older than me, maybe in their 40s or 50s, hard to tell. Their faces were weathered and expressionless. They didn't look sick or unstable, just guarded. They didn't approach, they didn't speak. They just stood there until I reached the truck and then stepped back into the trees. I drove home shaking more from the realization than fear. It was clear then that this wasn't one person living off-grid. It was more than one, and they weren't lost. They knew exactly where they were. Over time, people pieced together bits of older history. There had been families forced off land decades earlier when mining companies came in. Some people never fully reintegrated. Some avoided towns entirely. There were rumors of men who raised children in the woods, teaching them to stay hidden and distrust outsiders. Nothing official, just what people remembered being told. After the second winter, the incidents stopped, or at least no one talked about them anymore. People respected certain boundaries without needing them marked. The woods reclaimed the rest. Years later, I still live in Appalachia. I hike, I hunt, I work outdoors, but there are places I don't go. Not because I think something supernatural is there, because I believe some people chose to stay out of sight, and they're willing to protect that choice. The mountains are big enough for that, and if you leave them alone, they usually leave you alone too.
I grew up hearing that some houses don't belong to the living. They stand where they always have, letting people pass through them, but never truly giving themselves over. You can sleep inside them, you can eat there, you can laugh there, but the house itself is waiting for someone else. The old place at Wall's Mill was one of those. My grandparents lived there for a time, back in the early 30s, when work was scarce and winter came early and hard. They didn't call it the ghost house at first. That name came later, after the house made itself known. The mill had already gone quiet by then. The water still moved, but slower, like it had learned patience. The house stood a short walk from it, half hidden by bare trees and brush. It was a narrow, sagging structure with rough pine floors and a roof that groaned under frost. They took the house because it was there, because no one else wanted it, and because the cold doesn't wait for better options. The first thing my grandmother noticed was the smell. It wasn't the clean smell of winter or the sharp bite of cold wood. It was something older, something sour and iron-heavy, like damp cloth left too long in the dark. They didn't ask questions. People didn't back then. You were grateful for shelter, even if it came with silence that felt too thick. The bedroom was the worst room. It sat at the back of the house, smaller than the others, with one narrow window that let in very little light. The floorboards there were darker, stained in places where scrubbing had failed. The bed frame leaned to one side, rotten at the joints, as if it had collapsed once and never quite forgiven the effort. That was where it happened. A man had killed himself there years earlier. That's what people said, plain and unsoftened. No details offered, no prayers attached, just the fact, dropped like a stone. My grandmother told me about the quilt. It was winter, and the house held the cold the way a grave holds damp. She went searching for something to cover them that first night, moving from room to room with a lantern. In the bedroom, she found an old patched quilt folded near the bed. When she lifted it, the light caught the walls. She said there was blood everywhere. Not fresh, not wet, dark and soaked into the boards, into the grain of the wood itself. It wasn't splattered like something violent had just happened. It was settled, as if it had been there long enough to decide it belonged. The mattress was worse. What was left of it sagged and crumbled, the stuffing rotted, the fabric torn. It looked less like a bed than the memory of one. She stood there longer than she meant to, long enough for the cold to seep into her bones and the smell to settle in her chest. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She folded the quilt back where she found it and walked out. That night, family came to stay. My uncle and aunt, Ump and Grace, and a couple of their young children arrived late for reasons no one remembers now. There wasn't much space, so they made a pallet on the floor beside my grandparents' bed in that back room. No one mentioned the stains. No one mentioned the man. You don't always speak of things you're afraid might be listening. They
They went to sleep with the sound of the mill water in the distance and the boards popping as the house cooled. It was sometime near morning when the sound began. Not a crash, not a voice at first. Footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps, bare feet on rough pine boards, the sound of skin against wood, the soft complaint of old nails shifting in their holes. My grandmother said it sounded like someone pacing, unsure of where to go. The footsteps moved along the walls, paused, continued. The boards cracked gently under each step. No one moved, no one spoke. Fear has a way of holding people still, like a hand pressed to the chest. Then the voice came, low, hoarse, close enough to feel. I want my house. Not shouted, not begged, just stated as if it were an obvious fact that had been ignored for too long. I want my house. The words scraped against the walls, against the mind. My grandmother said she felt the mattress shift slightly, as if someone had sat down at the edge of the bed. She did not look. The voice repeated itself, moving now, circling the room. I want my house. Uncle Ump woke then. He was never a man to sit quietly with fear. He listened, heart pounding, until the words came again, closer than before. He sat up and spoke into the darkness, his voice shaking despite himself. If you'll wait till morning, I'll give the damn thing to you. The footsteps stopped. The air changed. The house seemed to exhale, long and slow, as though it had been holding its breath for years. No one slept after that. When morning came, pale and thin through the window, the room was empty. No footprints, no movement. Just the stains, the broken bed, and the cold. They didn't stay long after that. Some houses don't ask politely. People say the house stood for years afterwards, empty again, watching the mill rot beside it. Others say it burned. Others say it was pulled down. But even now, folks near Wall's Mill don't linger where it once stood. They say if you walk there near daylight, you can still hear someone moving inside a house that isn't there anymore. Bare feet on rough boards, a man who never left, asking for what he believes is still his.
People talk about midnight like it's just another hour. Technically, it is. The clock flips, the day changes, nothing explodes. But there's a reason so many warnings start with that time. This story is one of them. I heard it years ago, and I didn't believe it, not fully. I believed parts of it, the grief part, the loneliness part, not the rest. Now, I'm not so sure. This happened decades ago in what used to be Czechoslovakia, back when travel was slow and news was slower. But the details matter less than the pattern, because the pattern is still around. A young woman lived alone in a small village. Her mother had died not long before, and the man she loved had gone to war. Letters stopped coming. Weeks passed, then months. No body, no confirmation, just silence. That kind of silence does things to people. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating full meals. She would sit near the stove at night, staring into nothing, replaying the same question over and over. Is he alive? Not. Eventually, someone told her about an old woman who lived on the edge of the village. People didn't call her a witch, not out loud, but they didn't call her anything else either. She was known for giving answers when no one else could. The girl went to her out of desperation, not belief. That was her first mistake. The old woman listened quietly, then gave instructions instead of comfort. 7 bones, 7 graves, 7 nights. Boil them in water every night, always at midnight. On the 7th night, she said, he would come. If he walked, he was alive. If he rode a horse, he was dead. And if the horse was white. She didn't finish that sentence. People like to think the danger is in the supernatural part. It's not. The danger is how easy it is to follow instructions when you're grieving. At that time, there was an epidemic. People were dying fast. Graves were being reopened. Bones were being discarded without care. No one stopped her when she collected them. The first night, she boiled the water and dropped the bones in. The sound was normal at first, just water and heat. She sat nearby, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The second night, the same. By the third night, she thought she heard something, just a sound beneath the boiling, like a whisper caught in steam. She leaned closer. It wasn't words, more like breath. She told herself it was imagination. By the fifth night, she was no longer telling herself anything. The sound was clear now, rhythmic, repetitive. Come, come, come. Not shouted, not spoken loudly, inviting. On the seventh night, she prepared everything like the old woman told her. She bundled cloth, she held on to her rosary. The pot began to boil before midnight, and when the clock struck 12, the sound changed. The water boiled harder than it should have. The bones knocked against the metal like they were moving on purpose. The whisper turned into a chant. Come, come, come. Then she heard hooves, not close, far away, but getting closer. She stepped outside before she realized she was moving. At the edge of the road stood a horse, white, too white, not pale, empty, like it reflected more light than it should. The man sitting on it looked like her lover, but something was wrong with the way he sat, like he wasn't balanced properly, like he wasn't holding himself up. He asked her to come with him, not begged, not demanded, just asked. She climbed on behind him. As they rode, he spoke, simple sentences, calm observations, the moon, the road, how fast they were moving. Then the words changed. He stopped talking about the road. He started talking about how easily people leave. They passed a church, then a cemetery. That's when she understood. She asked him to get down first so he could help her. When he did, she dropped the bundles and ran. He didn't chase her right away. He stopped to tear them apart. That mattered. She reached a small cottage and bolted the door. Inside was a dead man laid out on a bench and chickens huddled in the corner. She didn't ask why. Fear doesn't wait for answers. The man outside asked to be let in. When he couldn't, he asked the dead man to open the door. The dead man said he couldn't. Something about the rosary. That's when the scratching started. Not pounding, scratching, like nails against wood, like patience wearing thin. She begged the rooster to crow. It refused. She promised it would never be chased away again. That's when it crowed. The sounds outside stopped instantly. Morning came. The house was still standing. The scratches were there. She never boiled water at midnight again. Neither should you. Because whether you believe this story or not doesn't really matter. What matters is this. Midnight isn't when things begin. It's when they finish coming.